This video will show you how to use the pgAdmin tool. That's the tool that you installed, hopefully, when you followed the video installing Postgres onto your laptop. And this tool is a visual tool for working with databases and tables and data. And you don't have to use this tool because you do have another tool that you could work with. And that tool is a non-visual environment, and it's called SQL Shell PSQL. And you could actually access that, and it looks like a little command window. You could do all your work there. But the pgAdmin tool is going to be a GUI environment, which allows you to click and type things in, so a lot friendlier, easier to get things done. The way you start that is I open up my Windows Start button and I type pgAdmin, and you should see that. Go ahead and open pgAdmin, and that will open a brand new tab. Because this is an online version, you can't even download it on your system, so it's a standalone. Now, when you first come into pgAdmin, it might prompt you for your username, creating a super password, things like that. When you do create that super password, you need to remember that because you'll need that sometimes for logging in to the databases. The first thing you see in pgAdmin is you see the servers. If you click on that arrow, you'll see what servers you have set up. We have the PostgreSQL 13, which is the version we installed, and then we have something called localhost. You'll see that later on in the semester. If you click the arrow next to Postgres, you'll see that you have database, login group roles, and table spaces. Now this video isn't going to be a comprehensive how to use pgAdmin 4 and how to work with databases. If you want to learn more about that, I would recommend you finding a course, maybe in My Educator, somewhere else, that teaches you how to use Postgres database, normalization, how to use administrative tools. But we're just going to cover the basics that you'll need in order to create a database, create tables, add data, and we do that so that we can actually work with that database later on in our website. One thing you can do under the login and group roles, if you expand that, you'll see that there's our database right there. The Postgres, that's the one that you installed. And under our group roles, you can actually right mouse click on the login group roles and choose create login group role. And you can give it a name of whatever you want for a user. Um, maybe call it new super user. And then we go through the definition and you give it a password. Whatever password you want that you'll remember. I'm just going to make mine the same. Not that I would ever do that, but just for the sake of this video. So this is going to be new super user, same case as what the name of it was. Just remember those things. And then privileges. They're a login to the database. They are a super user. They can create other users. They can create databases. They can update the database. So you'll want those all checked. You can leave the last one unchecked. And the rest of these things, the membership and the parameters, security, these are all things that you'll learn when you do administration tools in database. This last thing is interesting because it actually shows you the SQL statement that's being created in order to make this happen. Go ahead and click Save, and that's how you can add a brand new user to this database, the Postgres 13 database. Now go ahead and open up Databases, and under Databases, we see that there's our Postgres database. That's the default one that was created when we installed Postgres, and we want to create a brand new database. We don't need to work with this one because we're just going to leave that the way it is. We want to learn how to create a brand new one. So if you click on Databases, right mouse click, choose Create Database. You can now give it a name of anything you want. I'll type in registration. And under this database, I gave it a name. I'm not worried really about the definition of it or even the security parameters, but this is the actual SQL that will be used by Postgres to create this database. Be aware that it does add some things that you might not have to use if you were just using the shell. In fact, if you were just using the shell, you could type create database registration, done. It sets up the database for you. Go ahead and click save, and that will create a brand new database for you. And once it comes back, you're going to see that we have a new database. Sometimes you have a little X here. That just means you have to click on it to make it active. Now that we have our database, we want to create a table. Working with Postgres compared to other databases like SQL Server, you might just be used to clicking on the database and then choosing like create table. Now, I don't really see a table in there anywhere. I see the word schema, which maybe that's what that really is. Well, let's come back out and go look at schemas. Here's our schemas, and under schema, we see the word table. We don't have any tables right now, but this is how I create my tables. I go to the database, go down to schemas, go to tables, right mouse click, create table. Now you can give it a table name. We'll call this one student, and that's going to represent the block of information related to a student. Now within the student table, you're going to have different columns. So go to columns, and you have to click this plus sign right here to add a new column. And you could add a column, and we could say that the first column is a student ID. And that student ID is going to be an integer. Now be aware when you click on the data types, look at all the data types Postgres has. That is something you might not be used to if you're working in SQL Server, Oracle, other languages. And some of these data types I've even looked at, and I look at and I think, I don't even know what this is. I've never used it. An array of char, an array of big ints, an array of bit. Yes, you can actually store an array of values in one column in Postgres. You might never do that. Just be aware you can do that. This video is only going to focus on the main data types that you might see, the most common ones, things like integer, varchar, real, numeric, things like that. This is going to be an integer data type. See this little icon right here? Click on it, and you can give more information about that column now. In fact, one thing cool that we can do is we can say, yes, that is the primary key. We could have also clicked it right there. Do we want it to be null? Nope, it has to have a value. The definition of it. It's a data type, yeah, data type of integer. If it was a numeric, we could specify the length and the number of decimals. Constraints. This is going to be an identity field. So under constraints, we'll make identity, meaning that you could actually start at a certain number and tell it how much to increment by and have a max and a min. We could also have a generated. And a generated could say that the system could go out and based upon some expression, it will use that expression to generate the value. We're going to go ahead and stick with identity, and we'll just start at a certain number. Let's start at number 1. We're going to increment by 1. We won't worry about max and min, but this now means that every time we add a new record, the student ID will start with 1 and then keep incrementing where it left off. And that's a way that you can actually create a field that the computer will maintain and update. Now don't click save yet. It almost feels like the way this is designed, the user experience, that you need to click save to save this information about the column to add a new one. If you do click save, table's done. Then you're going to have to go do a modified table in SQL to go and change it. So instead, to close this little tab, click the little pencil again, and that minimizes it. Let's add another column, plus sign. We'll say first underscore name, and that's going to be a varchar 50. Now, notice when I say varchar 50, it doesn't understand that. That's because a varchar 50 or a varchar is really what we call a character varying in Postgres. And then I'll say that it's 50 characters long. Not null, has to have a value, not a primary key. Add a new column. This will be last name. This will also be a character varying, and it'll be 50 long. And let's add one more column, and we'll say that this is going to be a GPA for this student, and it's going to be a numeric, And now, if you notice, I can come right here and do length and precision. That means how many digits total on the left and the right will there be? Now for a GPA, usually it's like a 4.00. So we already know that the decimals will be 2 and the total number will be 3, not including that decimal. So that'll be a 3, 2. Now if you take a look at the SQL, this is what's being generated. Character varying, that's another way of saying varchar. Numeric, 3, 2. Primary key is the student. Identity, it's going to be generated by the computer. It's going to start at 1 and always increment by 1. So that's the SQL statement that's being generated for you. Now that we have that information set up, go ahead and click Save, and that will create the table. Now, if I wanted to work with that table, then I could go ahead and do the following. You can click on this little icon that says View Data. Looks like a little spreadsheet. The other thing you could do is you could right mouse click on it and you could choose the query tool, and that allows you to actually type in a SQL statement. This also allows you to view and edit data. You could view all the rows, first 100, the last 100, or you could create a filter, meaning you could say I only want to see certain rows. I click all rows, and here is the information. Now if you notice, this is sort of like an Excel spreadsheet where we have the columns specifying the value and the row specifying where you're going to type something in. So these columns, when I say the value, in other words, the characteristics or the description of the column. So do I need to type anything in student ID? I'm going to leave it empty. And the reason I am is because we said it was an auto-generated field. That's an auto-generated. I clicked on first name, and let's write John, and let's make it all uppercase. Okay. And last name is Doe, and GPA is going to be 3.51. Enter. If you notice, the system automatically generated a value here. Now we say that the student ID is null. Let's just see what happens if we come down and do another record. And we'll say that Mary Lamb is also here. Mary and Lamb. And Mary has a 3.52. So I've typed in some data. Currently though, this still says that it's empty. Could I come in here and put a value? We'll see what happens. Leave that alone the way it is right now. Let's go ahead and close this window. And you can close that by clicking on this X, close the current active panel. Yes, save the changes. If you look at it one more time, you'll notice that the system did automatically populate these fields. This is just showing the record number. In fact, I just came over here and typed in 3.55. You can change values if you want to change a value, 3.56. Press enter. These values were auto-generated because they're called identity fields. Let's go ahead and add one more. Notice I don't mess with the identity field. I'm just leaving that alone. And let's add buck, and we'll add wheat, and buckwheat is doing great, 3.73. Enter. And there's the information, right? Let's go ahead and just close this and see what happens. Do you want to save the changes? Yes, we do. We save our changes. Did it really save? Click on the view data. And there it is. And if you notice, this is the SQL statement. This SQL statement produces this data. So let's say that we need to get rid of buckwheat because buckwheat already graduated. So I highlight buckwheat, click on the number. You don't have to highlight, I just click on the number. And then I come up here to the delete key. It's a little garbage can, and I click delete. Notice that it puts a red line through that system. but the record actually is still there. It's just deleted, but the changes are stored in a buffer. And until you actually force that change, the record is still there, even though it's marked for deletion. Now, one way we've been forcing the change is by clicking on the X and then choosing Save. Another way is simply by clicking on the Save Data Changes or pressing F6. The record's now gone. Now, what happens if we add somebody else back to the list? Let's go ahead and click on the name and we'll add Alfalfa. And Alfalfa's last name we'll say is Sprout. Okay. And Alfalfa's GPA, hasn't been paying attention, so he's at 2.5. And if you notice, if you type 2.50, we'll actually store that 0 for you. Watch what happens when I now post the change or I save data. His number now goes to 4. The record number is 3 because this is how many records are on the table, but this was the identity field. And so even though it feels like the new identity should be 3 again, the system kept track of that and it knew that 3 was already used and it already incremented by 1. So this is how you can add data and delete data, how we save the changes. There's how you delete the data. And then the other thing we can do is we can actually write our own queries, and that would simply be done by clicking on the query tool. And you can run your own queries now. We could say select, doesn't have to be uppercase, asterisk from. Now, if I just type in the word student and try to run that query by clicking on this button, watch what happens. Works great. There it is, right? Could you actually specify the database in front of that student name? In some languages, you say registration dot student. If I run that again, it says it does not understand who registration is. Other database packages say that you have to include it in quotes. Still doesn't understand who it is. The way Postgres works, if you want to qualify the table, and this is what it's called, qualifying, you type in the word public dot student. That works fine. But if you really want the database name in front of it, you'd have to say registration.public.student. And this is how you qualify a table in whatever database that table resides. That errored out because I had certain pieces highlighted. In fact, if you highlight something, it will only run what is highlighted. So this is how you can create your own queries. You can do select statements. We could have said select first name, and we could have said order by first name in descending order. And once again, remember the SQL statements, you don't have to make them uppercase. I just do that so that they jump out. So, and that's why it's Mary, John, and Alfalfa, because we now take the first name and sort it by the first name in descending order. So this query tool right here, that allows you to do a lot of work with SQL, practice it, create SQL statements, modify the data. So this is how you can actually work with Postgres and create a database, create a table, add data to the table, store the changes, and delete records. When you're done, you can just close that. Sure, let's save all of our changes. And in this case, what it's trying to do is it's say, do you want to save that query? We don't want to save that query. Click cancel, close one more time, and this time we say we won't save that query. Let's close this window also. And we're back to the basics screen of our Postgres database.